Hello everybody, my name is Armando Escalante. I'm from Volusia County. Just a real quick biography about myself. My wife and I, we produce a show called Tales of Waterville, which is an animated show for children. I'm a member of the Volusia 912. As a matter of fact, we have our president and founder of Volusia 912 right here, Ray Sanchez. And I'm also the communications chair for the Volusia County Republican Executive Committee. I have a lot to cover, and I'm going to try to move as quickly as I can because there's so much to know about the Frankfurt School. And so I'm going to move on pretty quick. I'm going to start off with its history. And then I'm going to get into what it is that they did, how they've done what they've done, how they've affected this country, and what we can do about it. And I'm also going to talk about, if I have time, I'm going to give an example of one of the theories that they came up that is all over Common Core. And this is very important for us to understand this, because if we don't understand it, we get broadsided when things are presented to us, when curriculum is presented to us. We get broadsided, not understanding what it is that's coming our way. So, I'm going to go ahead and get started. Why is it important to understand the Frankfurt School? Well, two reasons. The Frankfurt School has been the most influential think tank and activist organization in the 20th century. And the Frankfurt School has had a profound but negative impact on American culture. So if they've been the most influential think tank and they've had the most negative impact on our society, I think it behooves us to know what this school is, who they are, and what they did. Because every single person in this room, whether you realize it or not, have been influenced by this school. And I'm going to get into all of that. So what I'm going to do very, very quickly is I'm going to get into its history. Essentially what happened in 1922, okay, the Communist International, which had just been established 3 years before, they were assessing the movement of communism in Western societies. And they weren't happy. Communism was not taking effect. It was not moving as they would have hoped. They had just gone through the Russian Revolution and World War I. And they were successful in Russia, but they weren't as successful in the Western countries, particularly the United States. So they decided to get together and have a symposium. And it was called by Lenin, and they called it the meeting over at the Marx Engels Institute in Moscow, and they got together, and they decided, they talked about the whats, the whys, and what they needed to do to go ahead and further communism in the Western countries. In particular, the United States. So they devised a plan. They were so excited about this plan, they decided to organize. These were some of the members that were present. And we'll get into some of these names later. But there was a few other folks that are not on that list. Max Horkheimer, who led the school after its founding, Herbert Marcuse, Abraham Maslow. A lot of these people in the school have had tremendous influence on thought in America since the 20s. So they decided to organize. Felix Twale was the founder, and they decided to call it the Institute of Social Research, and they decided to establish at the University of Frankfurt in Germany. And it was later known as the Frankfurt School. That's where it gets its name. Okay? So they began to do their work, and then but they ran into a problem because the Nazis came to power in Germany, and they were established in Germany. And essentially what happened with the Nazis is they kicked all the communists out. So the members of the Frankfurt School, they immigrated into the United States. And with an insider at Columbia University, they received funding, and they took their school, moved it from Germany, and brought it into the United States. Columbia University. With salaries and all the money that they needed to go ahead and further their studies. And then, since then, so right now I'm just kind of talking about their history. I'm going to start getting into what it was that they discussed and what they concluded. But they essentially, from Columbia University, they spread to every single Ivy League university in this country. They became department heads. They became department heads of philosophy. They became department heads of history. They became department heads of psychology, and all in education. You name it. They became department heads of every single university in this country. And from that point, from that perspective, being department heads, they began to spread their ideas, change curriculum, and begin to influence the society on an academic level. It started primarily from your graduate studies, but eventually started working down into undergraduate studies, and then further down. It's philosophy. I know I'm moving along pretty quick here because there's a lot to cover. It's very important to understand this. Okay. This is from an article from the Fidelio magazine written in 1992, and this is probably the best description in a very short form of what they concluded at that meeting. George Lucas, who was one of the main thinkers, and they followed his thought, he said this. He said, Lucas identified that any political movement capable of bringing Bolshevism to the West would have to be, in his words, demonic. It would have to possess the religious power which is capable of filling the entire soul. However, Lucas suggests that such a messianic political movement could only succeed when the individual believes that his or her actions are determined not by personal destiny, but the destiny of the community. In a world that has been abandoned by God. That is what they concluded. That these people that were in the Frankfurt School were all German intellectuals, some Russians. They were all Marxists. Lucas hated God. Every single one of those members in the Frankfurt School despised Christianity, despised everything that it stood for, and despised God. So this is what they concluded. Further, the problem was that as long as the individual had the belief, or even the hope of belief, that his or her divine spark of reason could solve the problems facing society, then that society would never reach the state of hopelessness and alienation, which Lucas recognized as a prerequisite for social revolution. So what is he saying? He's saying that you had to bring Bolshevism to the West, you had to make it a godless society. So then they devised a plan. And this was their plan. The total annihilation Now, I'm telling you this, but I'm actually going to further on in my presentation actually give you quotes of the people themselves, the members of the Frankfurt School themselves, that said everything that I'm saying to you here. The total annihilation of Western culture, particularly Judeo-Christian culture, was necessary. And a new cultural form needed to be created to increase the alienation of the population. A new barbarism was needed. There was another Marxist, if you're familiar with these names here, Antonio Gramsci. He was a member of the Italian Communist Party. He was one of the founders. Mussolini put him in prison. He died in prison. While he was in prison, he wrote a series of essays, and those series of essays are called prison notebooks. And this is what he said in prison notebooks. He said, the civilized world has been thoroughly saturated with Christianity for 2,000 years. Any country grounded in Judeo-Christian values cannot be overthrown until those roots are cut. But to cut the roots, to change culture, a long march through the institutions was necessary. Only then will the power fall into our laps like a ripened fruit. His words. Willy Munzenberg was one of the founders of the Frankfurt School. He said this: we will make the West so corrupt it stinks. This is what the Frankfurt School was all about. The strategy to destroy Judeo-Christian culture became known as cultural Marxism. It's got another name, and you all have heard it. Political correctness. They're using political correctness to destroy our Judeo-Christian culture. I'll go on. I have a lot to say here. So how have they executed their plan? These were their goals. Emptying the churches, the teaching of sex and homosexuality to children, the promotion of excessive drinking, encouraging the breakdown of the family. This is their plan. This is what they came up with. The undermining of schools and teachers' authority, control and dumbing down of media, the creation of racism offenses, continual change to create confusion, huge immigration to destroy identity, an unreliable legal system with bias against victims of crime. We saw that earlier in the presentation that was made. Dependency on the state for state benefits. These were their goals. Do they sound familiar? Are we seeing that happening in America right now? That's why it's happening in America. There's more. They decided in order to make these goals, to execute these goals, we have to target some things. We had to target the patriarchy in the home. We had to target motherhood. We had to target childhood. We had to target marriage. We had to target the family. And we had to target Christianity. Such a blessing to be here today and listen to the previous speakers, because they're telling you, okay, Christianity is the target. There's no way to save this country unless we recognize that it's our Christian heritage that the Marxists are after. They're not after destroying our economic system. They're not after destroying our health system. That is part of it. That's not the goal. They have to destroy the culture. It's our Judeo-Christian culture that is the real enemy to Marxism. I'll go on. The institutions that Antonio Gramsci was saying, remember he said, a long march through the institutions? What is he talking about? He's talking about the power centers of society. What are those power centers? Well, there's those institutions that influence culture. Academia, media companies, music industry, movie industry, visual arts, literal arts, churches, seminaries. I'll say that again, seminaries, and the education system. Let's talk about academia. Here's a nice little gentleman here. I don't know if that's a good word for him. Bertrand Russell. Bertrand Russell was probably one of the most influential behavioral psychologists in the 20th century. All areas of psychology, physiology, and education, he's the man that formed the thought of what is being taught in the universities, and what's taught at those universities, those students come out and they teach his ideas. Now let's look at what he said. He said, regarding education, his physiology and psychology afford fields of scientific technique which still await development. The importance of mass psychology. Mass psychology. Okay, that's global or the psychology of the masses. That's what he's referring to. The importance of mass psychology has been enormously increased by the growth of modern methods of propaganda. Of those, the most influential is what is called education. The social psychologists of the future will have a number of classes of school children whom they will try different methods of producing an unshakable conviction. Listen, an unshakable conviction that snow is black. Various results will soon be arrived at. First, number one, the influence of the home is obstructive. Number two, that not too much can be done unless indoctrination begins at the age of 10. Common Core opponents, this is where all this comes from. Bertrand Russell has given the education system the plan on how we need to train our children. Third, the verses set to music and repeatedly intoned are very effective. And number four, the opinion that snow is white must be held to show a morbid taste of its eccentricity. What does he mean by that? What he means that if you're going to teach everybody that snow is black, but there's someone over here that says that no, that's not true, snow is white. Well, they're eccentric. They're the ones that you need to marginalize because they have the truth. No. They're the crazy ones, but those that really know that snow is black, those are the ones that know the truth. That's what he's referring to. So not only are we going to train our children that snow is black, those that want to say, hey, that's not true, well, we're going to demonize those. Then he goes on. Then at the last sentence, when the technique has been perfected, every government that has been in charge of education for a generation will be able to control its subjects securely without the need of armies or policemen. I don't know about you, but that sounds like social engineering to me. Benjamin Bloom, if there's any educators in here, I'm sure you know who he is. He said this about education. He said the purpose of education is to change the thoughts, actions, and feelings of students. He didn't say the purpose of education is to teach reading, writing, and arithmetic. No, he said the purpose of education is to change the thoughts, actions, and feelings of students. That is what's happening with Common Core right now. That is what they're doing. That is what their goal is to change the thoughts, actions, and feelings of students. What are those thoughts, feelings, and actions of students? Their Judeo-Christian heritage. That's what they have to wipe out on the minds of Americans. I'll go on. He also said this. He defined good teaching as challenging the students' fixed beliefs. Media. I got more coming, so I want to show some examples of what this is, so I'm kind of streamlining here. BWC said this: the press should not only be a collective propagandist and a collective agitator, but also a collective organizer of the masses. See, Marxists have taken over the education of our journalists, and they've taken over journalism, period. And this is what they do. It's not about reporting the facts. It's not about reporting the news. It's about collective propaganda, being collective agitators, and being collective organizers of the masses. Drugs. See, now, what I'm doing here is they went after different institutions. They went after media, drugs, education. This is what they said about drugs. Very important. This is Aldous Huxley, who was another very well-known thinker. Marxist. All these guys were communists. Okay? Bertrand Russell joined the Frankfurt School later on. He joined the Frankfurt School in the 50s. But Aldous Huxley wrote a letter to George Orwell. Okay? And he said this. He said, within the next generation, I believe that the world's leaders will discover that infant conditioning and narco-hypnosis are more efficient as instruments of government than clubs and prisons, and that the lust for power can be just as completely satisfied by suggesting people into loving their servitude as by flogging them and kicking them into obedience. See, what's happening is that we're being socially engineered, ladies and gentlemen. That is what's happening. And the way that they're doing it is through psychological subversion and it's through psychological operations that are being done on a level through education, through media, through movies, through music, you name it. All the institutions of influence, all that power is being thrust on us to get us to change the way that we thought before World War I. More. This is Dr. Timothy Leary speaking with Aldous Huxley about the Harvard University Psychedelic Drug Project flashback. This is what their conversation was. So Aldous Huxley says this: these brain drugs, mass-produced in laboratories, will bring about vast changes in society. This will happen with or without you or me. All we can do is spread the word. The obstacle to this evolution, Timothy, is the Bible. Then, Timothy Leary responds. He says, we have run up against the Judeo-Christian commitment to one God, one religion, one reality that has cursed Europe for centuries and America since our founding days. Drugs that open the mind to multiple realities inevitably lead to a polytheistic view of the universe. We sensed that the time for a new humanist religion based on intelligence, good-natured pluralism, and scientific paganism has arrived. Why do you think these global elites are pushing for this medical marijuana that you see going rampant around the country? It's not because they have believed that this is the best thing as alternative medicine so that people can get a different, healing for whatever it is that marijuana does for them. That's not what it's for. That's what they're telling us, but that is not the real reason. This is the real reason. Infant conditioning and narco-hypnosis. They're using, you go back, Aldous Huxley wrote a book called A Brave New World in 1931. He wrote another book called A Brave New World Revisited. The first book was fiction. The second book was nonfiction. The first book he promoted, he envisioned a totalitarian society in which drugs are used as a means to pacify the masses. The second book, he basically goes in and says, hey, this idea that I came up with in my fiction 25 years earlier, hey, it's working. It's a wonderful idea. We need to continue to do this. That's where this marijuana stuff comes from. It comes from the idea that they need the drugs to pacify society. That's why we have all these drugs that are being given to our children for ADD and DHD and all these DDTs, initial stuff. I can't keep up with all of them. These drugs that they're giving our kids now were illegal in the 60s. Why are they legal now? They need to pacify the masses. This is a more sophisticated form of slavery that they're trying to bring on the American people. That is what we're fighting. Social engineering. By the way, he also wrote another book called The Doors of Perception, which, by the way, the group The Doors, they named their music group based on this book. And it was all about Aldous Huxley's trip on mescaline. Entertainment. Well, it's pretty obvious when you look at the movies. I don't know of any movie, or it's rare, let's put it that way, where there's anything edifying in any of the movies, any of the commercials, any of the music, any of the sitcoms. They're using entertainment as propaganda, as a tool for propaganda to push their agenda. Okay? And their agenda is like what I listed before. It's the attacking the family, making homosexuality normal. All this stuff that we see on television is not an accident. This is a perpetrated effort to change the way we think. Lenin said, if you tell a lie long enough, I think it was Stalin, people will begin to believe it. And they understand. They understand the psychology of man. See? Lukács wrote a book on it, as a matter of fact. And this was before even the Frankfurt School was established. He wrote a book called Souls and Forms, where he promotes the abolition of culture. How? He argues that, in this book, he argues that the arts are an excellent means to degenerate culture, to create cultural hatred. So, when you look at all this stuff, you start looking at it and you start asking yourself, can this be a coincidence? Well, when you look at it historically, it's not. They're telling us. They've told us. This stuff is public. You can go and research. You can't research it in a night. But if you study this enough, you're going to find all this information is public. It's in their books, it's in their writings, it's in their essays, it's in their interviews. You can watch these people speak about this stuff. It's out there. It's not hidden. These are different songs, wonderfully edifying songs. I'm being sarcastic, of course. 3 movies that I won't let my son watch because they're total propaganda films. And here's the big one. The infiltration of the church. Lenin said, our program necessarily includes the propaganda of atheism. This is all history, ladies and gentlemen. This is not my conclusions, what I've drawn from what I've read. No, this is historical fact. We are being socially engineered, and they're trying to rip our Judeo-Christian culture and our Christianity. They're trying to rip it out of our culture. They're trying to rip it out of our minds so that we become a godless, barbaric society. And I'll get into more of that later as to why. Karl Marx said this in the Communist Manifesto. But communism abolishes eternal truths. It abolishes all religion and all morality. Instead of constituting them on a new basis, it therefore acts in contradiction to all past historical experiences. So Karl Marx is arrogant enough to say, hey, history shows that all you got to do is change the religions. No, we're not going to do that. We're just going to go ahead and abolish it. Just get rid of morality, get rid of religion, and get rid of eternal truths. This is from Josephus. Now, Josephus was a Jewish historian. He was a contemporary of Jesus. He wrote about Jesus. Very well known, very well respected. He wrote this. He said, now it was Nimrod who excited them to such an affront and contempt of God. This was written over 2,000 years ago. He was the grandson of Ham, the son of Noah, a bold man, and of great strength of hand. He persuaded them, the people, not to ascribe it to God as if it were though his means they were happy, but to believe that it was their own courage which procured their happiness, that happiness. He also gradually changed the government into tyranny, seeing that no other way of turning men from the fear of God, but to bring them into a constant dependence on his power. He also said he would be revenged on God. Karl Marx said that too. He said, my object in life is to dethrone God and destroy capitalism. His words. He also said that he would eventually be revenged on God if he should have a mind to drown the world again, or that he would build a tower too high for the waters to reach, and that he would avenge himself on God for destroying their forefathers. This is Nimrod that he's talking about. Now, who was Nimrod? He was the first tyrant on the earth. Anybody know what the definition of Nimrod is in Hebrew? We will rebel against the Lord. That's what the word Nimrod means. So he was the first tyrant, and his name means we will rebel against the Lord. Josephus wrote that. This is what you're going to find in churches today, and this is where the assault is. These are the weapons that are being used to change the Judeo-Christian mindset, our Christianity, and wipe it off our minds. They're using social justice. There are churches that have social justice committees right now. I know of some in Volusia County. Ray can tell you. They're all over the place. There's an organization called DART that is very, very involved in this effort. Gnosticism, Bible translations. I've been a Christian, and I've been studying Scripture since pretty much the time I became a Christian back in 1979. And I've watched Bible. Thank you. I'm going to move along here. I've watched Bible translations change. They're putting in words like justice, equality, and all these words in the new translations to get us to start thinking differently about what we're reading in the Bible. Gnosticism describes a collection of ancient religions whose adherents shunned the material world created by the Demiurge and embraced the spiritual world. Gnostic ideas influenced ancient religions that teach that gnosis may be reached by practicing philanthropy to the point of personal poverty, sexual abstinence, and diligently searching for wisdom by helping others. So this is counterfeit to what Christian giving is all about. It looks the same, smells the same, but unless you're trained, like the Hebrew writer said, unless you're trained, have your senses trained, you're not going to be able to discern the difference between good and evil. Gnosticism is evil. But you have to have your spiritual senses trained to see the difference. Okay. This is well, let me I want to try to go further. Here we go. Communists quibbled over the details of how to implement Marx's vision, but they were unanimous on one thing. Religion was the enemy. A rival to Marxist mind control, and it had to be vanquished regardless of cost and difficulties. Okay, here's an interview. This is from the Congressional Record, from the testimony of Reverend Richard Warbrand. And Senator Dodd asks him, this is from 1966, not the current Dodd, how do the communists use religion for their own purposes if they do? That is a very tragic side. The worst thing in Romania has not been the persecution of Christians. Persecution has made the Christians to be of steel. The worst thing has been the corruption of religion. They have put religious leaders, their men. The subcommittee has received substantial information that the effect of the Romanian communist government has infiltrated this country. Communist trained clergy with our mission than those of a spiritual nature. Do you have any information about that? Romanian communists are very interested in the fact that they have here in the States some 300,000 on their side. They can't very well win them for communism, but they can win them for a left-wing Christianity which supports communism. This is in the Congressional Record. Well, I'm going to speed up a little bit because my time's running out. So, I'm going to read some quotes from our founding fathers. All tyranny needs to gain a foothold is for people of good conscience to remain silent. Benjamin Rush said this: the only foundation of a useful education in a republic is to be aided in religion. Without this, there can be no virtue, and without virtue can be no liberty. And liberty is the object and life of all republican governments. Without religion, I believe the learning does real mischief to the morals and principles of mankind. Those people who will not be governed by God will be ruled by tyrants. Patrick Henry: it cannot be emphasized too strongly or too often that the greatest nation was founded not by religionists, but by Christians. Not on the religions, but on the gospel of Jesus Christ. For this very reason, peoples of other faiths have been afforded asylum, prosperity, and freedom of worship here. We have to start really becoming students of our Bible, and we have to start returning to God. As the previous speakers have said, they've said a lot of that already for me. But I want to get to this. This is the spectrum of how morality and government work. The more morality there is in society, the less government there is in need of government. The more immorality there is in a society, the more need for government there is. And you know that. So the ideas of the Frankfurt School were designed to destroy the Christian culture. Okay, I got 2 minutes here, so I want to go to this. Let me just say this. One of the saddest lessons of history, Carl Sagan said this, is this. If we've been bamboozled long enough, we tend to reject any evidence of the bamboozle. We're no longer interested in finding out the truth. The bamboozle has captured us. It's simply too painful to acknowledge even to ourselves that we've been taken. Once you give a charlatan power over you, you will almost never get it back. Okay? I want to try to get to this over here. Values clarification. I guess I'll have to skip that. But values clarification is one of the major evils in Common Core. And it's prevalent there. Okay? The strategy, I'm going to read it from this is from the values clarification method outline. The object of values clarification strategy is not to teach specific values, but to make students aware of their own personal values held, and of the way in which their values compare to those of friends, adults, different groups in society, and others in other societies in our times. It is hoped that as this awareness increases, students will what? Reconsider and perhaps modify poorly founded values. What are those values? Christian values. They're targeting the Christian values in the schools. This is what's being taught to the teachers and to the administrators. That's why you have so much resistance. When you try to go to the school boards, you try to talk to these administrators, it's like talking to a wall. They won't listen because they've been trained to do this. So I'm going to have to close. So I'm at 0. But there's so much to say. I just tried to cover as much as I could. But we have got to really realize that we are being deceived. And all the stuff that's happening in education and everything that's happening in our country is done by design. We have to stand up to it and say no and get involved. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.